Welcome back to Right on Four Corners. I'm your host, DelSheree Spinner. I am a USA Today bestselling author and an English teacher. As we're recording currently on Christmas break, which is lovely because I'm finally getting a chance to catch up on some reading and some interviews. And on this week's show, I am excited to talk to Donald Mengay, and we're going to be talking about Bear Life, which is the third book in his Eldorado trilogy. Donald, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, DelSheree. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very honored to be here, especially on the show from the Four Corners, which I just has sort of an iconic place in my head. I love that place. And anyway, I've been going there for decades. It's very meaningful to me. To speak about myself, I'm a working class guy from Cleveland, Ohio. And in 1981, well, before 1981, I moved to Denver, and I met my husband there in 1981. And he is a Mexican-American. And my life from then on changed. And the series of the Eldorado trilogy is sort of a fictionalized version of what it was like to be in a gay couple for the last 45 years and what it was like to be queer in America in the last 50 or 60 years, because so much has happened during that time. And I taught, like you, DelSheree, I taught literature, English and literature. I taught for about, 34 years, something like that. And I taught many queer novels, and I never ever found a novel that spoke to my experience being in a queer relationship so long, but also as a working class person. So I guess that's it. In the Bear Life, the first two novels are primarily about the 1970s and 1980s and what that was like. And then Bear Life comes back about 4 years later and looks back and sort of assesses what just happened there.
Thank you. Yeah, you cover a lot. I haven't had the chance to read the first two, so I kind of jumped in on Bear Life, where it's an interesting structure, and we'll get into that because you blend the different timelines in fun, unique ways. But you reference a lot of what has already happened in the first and second books, but you do so in a way to where even if someone like me who's jumping in on book 3, you can catch up and know what's going on. I appreciate that because sometimes with the radio show, I'm just like, here's a book at a random part in a series. And sometimes that's easier than others to jump in mid-story arc over the series and know what's going on.
I understand. And thanks for saying that. I sort of wrote them so that anyone could pick up any volume in any order and they would be intelligible. There have been people who picked up the second novel and just jumped right in and then went on to Bear Life and then went back and read the lead last. The lead is probably the most challenging of the three. It's my favorite one, but it's a challenge. And so thank you. I wrote them to be sort of interchangeable parts.
I like that. I think it's always a good approach with series because you never know how someone is going to encounter your work. And if it's just at a random point, it should still hopefully be enjoyable and make people want to go back and read the other parts as well.
That's the goal.
Now, with your series overall, it's interesting because the first two books would, I guess, really be categorized as historical fiction at this point, which is kind of crazy because even like 90s and earlier is now historical fiction, which is so weird.
It is weird. It is just too weird. Yeah.
And then with this one, it's more modern times. Was there any concern with your publisher of kind of making that big of a jump in the storyline? Because this one is about 40 years after the second book.
Yeah, that's a really great question. The second one leaves off at the height of the AIDS pandemic, where most of the major characters from the first and second novels really are all dying off. And in fact, it's a mass die-off, which is something that happened in my life. And it's too complicated to go into, but as the queer people at the time, it was very difficult with family and even with friends. We lost a lot of friends when we came out. And so we had pretty much our chosen family to rely on when we were living in Denver at the time. And we had probably a couple dozen, it's hard to say close friends, but it's weird to say close friends, but in fact, they all were. They all felt like a big, giant family to us. And we are the only two that are living today. all the other ones died off at the height of the pandemic. And I didn't know how really to, in a sense, to follow that up. And we ended up moving from Denver to New York City, and we're there for 3 decades. And New York comes up in Bear Life, and I wanted to talk about that, but I did not. There's so many coastal novels, and especially coastal queer novels, and I did not want to write another coastal novel. I wanted to write a novel that was from what some people derogatorily call Flyover America. I also call it MAGA America before it got its name, at least where I'm from originally. So I did not want to write about New York. I wanted to write about really Santa Fe and New Mexico, which I love passionately. My husband and I came here when we were just first together. That was the first place we came, was Santa Fe. And we said back then in 1981, we'll retire here someday. And that's what we did. So I may go back someday and write about New York City, but I don't want to because it seems like so many others do. And I love Middle America. I just love it for, all the challenges in some ways for a queer person. It's home to me and I relate to it. And my husband's from this area. His family goes back 500 years on the Mexican side between Santa Fe and Taos. But he's also a good chunk of Native American. So he goes back thousands of years. And I just wanted to write about that. I guess it just comes down to something as simple as that.
I think having those different perspectives and experiences from a wide variety of places is something that we're still lacking in publishing, especially lately. I think we've definitely gone backwards on that front. But like you said, a lot of, especially in queer fiction, tends to be bigger city areas, is either where the authors are from or where they're set. And my guess would be in part that those are areas that have been more welcoming and open over the last few decades, where a lot of smaller, more rural, more conservative areas, there is still a lot of conflict and fear of putting yourself out there and identifying yourself through your art. That is probably at least some aspect that holds back those stories being told. So I appreciate seeing more diversity in where these stories are told and what perspectives and just what those experiences are like, because living in small towns in New Mexico is going to be a very different experience from a large city where there might be more community and resources and just access to a wider variety of people than what you're going to get in a small rural conservative area.
I completely agree. And we're there. We are there. That's the most important thing to say, is that we are there, whether or not we're visible or even intelligible. Those are all different questions, but we are there. And one of the scenes that I sort of insisted on keeping in Bear Life was one that takes place in Monument Valley. And I won't go into the whole narrative, but two people driving through Monument Valley, we're talking about people back from Cleveland, where I'm from, they meet a Native woman who is queer, and she asked them for a ride. And so she ends up being, actually, that's in Ojo, but she ends up being a major player throughout the second and third novel. And I just love her as a character, and she comes out of my life. So I just wanted to give her a voice. And the other thing I want to say is that so many of my students, it was very common for me when I was teaching in New York City that I was the only white guy in the room, because my students were from all over the U.S. and they were from all over the world, actually. I wanted to, in a sense, reflect their experience that they had told me about, because many queer folk come from the heartland and they moved to New York City for reasons that you said. And it's sort of my love letter to them as well. Their life is, but the entire trilogy is. I just wanted them to know I see you, and I don't want to speak for them, but I wanted to have a voice that reflects the many beautiful people that I have met from the heartland of America.
I think the more that's available and accessible to people, the more encouragement that is for more people to share their stories when they're ready to do so. I know that there's a lot to factor in on whether you share your story or not, but I appreciate that there are those voices out there that help people know that they're not the only one, that they're not alone, that they are there. I know I've had students over just the last couple of years. I'll do anything that I feel like is a more sensitive topic that students might not want to share in discussion, I'll do those as like writing prompts.
Beautiful.
I've gotten more than one where, one of my students have shared something about their sexuality that they cannot talk about at home. And they
That's right.
certainly don't want to bring it up in class, but they still have a need to have somebody know who they are, even if it's going to stay on that piece of paper. And that's as much as they can have right now in a smaller
Yeah.
town in northern New Mexico.
Yeah,
That
that's right.
has gotten somewhat better as far as its, openness and being more accepting of people. But, it's still that challenge of how much of yourself can you share in the area that you are, especially as a teenager, where you don't
That's
have the option to move, you don't have access, you got to wait it out a lot of the times before you
that's
can
right.
really spread your wings and think about that a little bit more and find people who you are more comfortable sharing with and having more stories out there, even if young students are kind of stuck in whatever situation they're in.
Right.
I think it does help to have that in art and just to know that they're not alone.
Well, and it says a lot about you that they feel comfortable saying that to you. It's huge just to put it in writing. That it's just so liberatory. Just to be able to put it in words is major. And the fact that they felt comfortable says everything about you. And I'm very touched by that. One thing I can say is that I also do pottery on the side, and I was invited to one of the pueblos. I won't say which one, but I was invited to one of the pueblos to do a pottery workshop, not as a teacher, obviously, but as a student. And what was fascinating to me was when I got there, it basically was a completely queer space. Pretty much everyone there was queer. They were all native and part of sort of the, I don't want to say underground, that's not the right word, but of a group that does not, I'll just say, publish itself so widely. But they clearly had a bond that I was so unbelievably touched by, and it was just so powerful. One of the women who was not queer was my age, and she had spent the last couple decades going from pueblo to pueblo talking about HIV and AIDS and how to prevent it. And I've had so many experiences like that. I could go on and on and on about my experiences since we've been here, which is almost 8 years now, and the people that we've met and the queer people that we've met. So yeah, they're all there. They are just all there, but they're quiet about it in many ways. And I hope the sad part for me is that a gringo is the one writing this stuff. And I went out of my way to make all the characters as complicated and fully fleshed out as possible and avoid every stereotype there is on the planet about any group whatsoever. They're part of my life, and I also wanted to inhabit my novels with people who really do not have a voice. That was sort of my goal.
I think that's wonderful. I think it's something that in groups where they are underrepresented and that they don't have as easy access to whether it's publishing or different forms of art. I know it's a hard balance of do you share, what might come off as like telling other people's stories,
That's right.
or there's still that level of like putting those stories out into the world so that it is more recognized and
Mhm.
hopefully encourages those who live in those communities that don't have very much of a voice to slowly be able to feel safe enough to share their stories themselves. In a lot of communities, we're not quite to that point yet where I think a lot of people do feel safe enough to share their
That's
stories.
I think that's true completely. And my goal was hopefully to open a door.
Hmm.
Yeah. I guess that I could say it that way.
I like that. Well, one of the other things that I wanted to chat with you about is the combined trilogy overall. You go through a lot of the history in the first two books. And then what struck me with reading Bare Life is I think a lot of young people today who are, in one way or the other, not mainstream conformity, whether that's with neurodivergence or sexuality or culture, a lot of people are not. It's so weird because we have access to all the information, but we don't actually know the history a lot of the times.
I agree.
And
I
so,
totally agree.
like a lot of teens today, I see it with my students and even, with my own kids, they're college age now, but growing up in the world as it is today, they don't know what it took to get here. And then seeing
Exactly.
some of that roll backwards is
Yes, exactly.
really mind-boggling to them because they don't know the history, and you make connections with that in your series with Bear Life being 40 years later. You're kind of seeing this younger person in the story who hasn't experienced everything from the 70s and 80s and into the 90s, and trying to kind of understand that history while being part of the community in the current time as well, if that makes sense.
Yes, totally. You're speaking my language because it's a complicated thing. On the one hand, it's fantastic that they don't have to go through what my husband and I went through because it was difficult. We endured a lot over those years, and it's all in the novel, so I won't go and list the things, but we endured a lot of difficult things, including physical violence, and it just was a tough time. Discrimination in workplaces, it just has been a tough time. And so I'm so thrilled that younger people do not have to go through that. On the other hand, it's good for them to know that history and, the OK Boomer movement among young people, which is basically like, yeah, 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 all you boomers, yeah, 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 whatever, whatever, whatever. They basically don't want to hear what we have to say. I get that. I really get that because there is a element in my generation of just like we used to complain about when we were young, which is, you don't know what we've been through, like that kind of mentality. And I don't have that mentality. I understand the OK Boomer situation, and I don't ever want to preach to kids, and I never wanted to preach to my students. I never wanted to say the things we went through. But on the other hand, it's important for them, and it's more important than ever, I would say, these days, because nothing has distressed me more in the last 60 years than what is happening right now with the trashing of diversity, equity, and inclusion, with the stifling and the erasure of non-binary people and trans people. It is such a source of distress. I just can't even express, because that is exactly the thing we fought to make possible, was people following their hearts, basically, to be whoever and whatever they wanted to be. So I don't even know how to express my distress. So I wanted to definitely have the third novel narrated by a trans guy. That's for sure. And I wanted there to be not just the burden of representation of trans identity on one single character. I wanted there to be trans characters, plural, in the novel, which there are. And not as any kind of privilege, but just as yet another part of life, like being queer or being, the accident of all difference, right? Like all difference in life is a pure accident of birth. And whether we're talking race or gender or sex or even class, you name it. And so I sort of wanted the novel also to make a clear statement against, I'm just going to say the word, the kind of bigotry that prevents people from following their hearts and being whoever they feel they need to be.
I think that's a wonderful message to be emphasizing and having in the world today, because it's certainly one that is in many areas trying to be downplayed and quieted as much as possible.
Mhm.
And it's scary. It's
It
scary to
is.
see what's going on in the world today and how many people are being hurt by that. And it's interesting with students, and like you said, it's so good that fewer people today have had to experience, violence because of their sexuality or discrimination because of their race. It obviously still happens, but that's not the everyday occurrence most of the time,
Mm.
even though we're not moving in that positive direction at the moment.
No.
But I wanted to ask you about seeing the challenge of being kind of removed from those eras of the 60s, the 70s, 80s, where a lot of the battle for rights for various groups was most intense and an everyday part of life, that we're kind of removed from that at this point, where it is a little bit more normal that people expect to be treated the
I
same.
agree.
That makes it seems like that makes it hard for younger people to recognize that these things are being taken away from them because they didn't live so close to that battle to get them. Like, it seems normal that we should have them, and as they're being rolled back, like, it almost kind of seems like that, the frog in in the
Yes.
water. If it's warmed up slowly, they don't notice they're being cooked to death. But if you're thrown into the middle of the boiling water, then you jump out. It's kind of felt like that recently, especially for younger kids who maybe are not very aware of what all is going on in the world, that they just kind
Yeah.
of like, oh, well, I don't know, like that's changing. They're not always seeing how detrimental some of these changes are to the wider population.
I agree totally. I think it's such a wonderful point. And the concern is that, going back to the frog metaphor, the concern is that there's not enough alarm about what's happening, because change is not necessarily in the direction of liberalizing norms. Change can be in any direction. And also the clamp of power can be in any direction. And we know from the 1930s, there can be, the 20s was a great era for queer people. They had a great decade, and then it was followed by the Nazi era, in which things really got horrible. And so history is such an important thing to know. I feel a little conflicted about how to respond to your question, though, because on the one hand, the good thing about not being raised the way I was is that, in a sense, they're wrong. Everyone's wrong. If people think my lifestyle is wrong, they're wrong. And I had a lot of students like that who were absolutely not bothered at all by homophobes or transphobes or racists or anything. They simply knew in their hearts those people were all wrong. They knew they were out there, but they knew they were wrong. So all I can hope is that some of that prevails. And the other thing I can hope is that they get reading. Young people, they need to know their history. Every single young person needs to know their history and where we've come from. And again, you pointed out that these are historical novels, and in some ways, Bare Life has enough of that history, I would say, because the young trans character, Will, who narrates a good portion of the novel, he sort of thought his two uncles were sort of old-fashioned and doy-doy. But as the novel goes on, and Will does experience his own version of discrimination, he begins to think, maybe my uncles were not as clueless as I thought. And he begins to think a little bit more kindly about his old fart uncles, shall we say. So I don't even know how to, with not enough role models out there for young queer people, I do worry. There's no doubt about it. But I also know that there are enough allies out there, and people like you and other teachers who I just think are doing such an amazing job at responding to such diversity among their students, and doing the very best to give them a voice in the world, to themselves, to their families, and in the world. I can only hope that whatever happened over the last 60 years has taken enough of a foothold, and all these recent elections that we've been having seem to give me some hope that maybe people are not impressed with this backward turn that we've been going through with migrants, with queer people, with trans people, with people of color, with women. I mean, women clearly being fired from important positions simply because they're women or women of color. I'm just hoping we have come far enough that we are going to reject that mentality in the future.
I hope so too. Every time I look at the news, I'm just like, oh my goodness, what are we doing? And there are signs that hopefully more people are starting to see this is maybe not what we wanted.
Exactly.
And I think, unfortunately, it takes until someone is personally affected in a negative way before sometimes we wake up.
I
It's
agree.
interesting. We just wrapped up a semester-long unit of doing Animal Farm.
Oh, wow.
It was interesting to see how much my students enjoyed the book and what they learned from it, and some of the things that I'm like, okay, let's take that in a little bit more. I don't think it quite sunk in enough because we're seeing this today. Let's recognize the
Yeah.
similarities in today's world. Hopefully they
Yeah,
do.
that's fantastic. I just reread Animal Farm, and I reread 1984 as well, and Animal Farm, and it's just shocking, really, how germane both of those novels are. I mean, the possibilities for discussing Animal Farm are off the charts, aren't they?
Absolutely. I like to do both classic literature and more contemporary stuff. We're going to be doing a more contemporary book next semester, which I'm really excited about.
Can you tell me which one?
We're going to be doing T. Kingfisher's A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking.
Oh, wow. That
And
sounds fascinating.
it's a lot of fun, and it has some really great, like, deeper themes that still come back to a lot of the things that I would really like my students to learn and pay attention to. And it's in a fun fantasy world, but I
Nice.
love taking Fisher's books. She always has some really great, deeper messages for young people. And so excited to move on to that. But it is continually fascinating to me. We did To Kill a Mockingbird last year,
Wonderful.
and I was amazed by how much history my students had no idea about. And
Yeah,
I think we do a really big disservice in education of how little history we teach before high school, because it's
I agree.
so important
I
and really
agree.
just helps us be a little bit more aware and awake. But a lot of those classics are classics because we keep seeing these same patterns over and over again in society, and we need continual reminders to wake up and be aware
That's
of what's
right.
happening around us.
Well, and the thing is, history has sort of taken a hit in schools. I know it was where I taught in the corporatization of school. People wonder, like, does history have any purpose now? Which is just mind-boggling to me. History and philosophy and all these important things, languages and so forth. It seems like it's just computer science, computer science, computer science, or business. But the good news is they still want people to learn how to write and how to read. And so a lot of the history people are getting nowadays is in their literature classes, because literature is history and it's so rich in that way. One thing I want to say is I'm very interested in animality. In the first novel, The Lead to Our Undoing, is a novel, speaking of Animal Farm, that's narrated by a dog. It's a working class family that's at the center of that novel, and their dog is a mutt named Molly. And I wanted to have a character who was sort of outside of humans' fights about diversity. The father is a racist and an anti-Semite and sexist and a homophobe, you name it. And the dog has absolutely no, excuse the pun, but no dog in the fight of human difference. The dog only considers how people treat her. That's her entire way of determining how she treats people. I don't even know how to put it, but I think the whole thing about power and the way humans try to dominate each other rather than treat each other with a certain kind of to flatten the hierarchy. The dog has no interest in a hierarchy, I guess is the point. And the dog is also quite knowledgeable about human culture, as animals are, right? They observe us. So anyway, I just wanted to say that.
That's a really interesting approach. When I was looking up the books, that piqued my interest. And if I can ever get caught up on my reading list, I would like to go back and check that one out. Well, and Donald, I feel like I could probably keep talking to you for quite a bit more, but we are out of time as far as the episode. But as we wrap up, where can people find out more about you and about Bear Life and the rest of the trilogy?
The main place to go, and I just want to say thank you, by the way, for everything. I've so enjoyed this discussion, and I'm just so impressed with everything you're doing, including the show. Okay, they can go to www.donaldmengay.com, and all the information about the books is there. The reviews are all on there. I have a blog that I put out. I regularly put out a blog. I just put a brand new one out recently, which is called Directions to Heaven and Hell. So that'd be the best place to go.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I will put a link in the show notes so people can find you easily. And keep in touch. I would be happy to have you back in the future. This was a great chat.
Thank you so much. I would be honored to come back. I'm working on a novel right now, a historical novel about Santa Fe in the 19th century. So I'm just about to start writing that after 2 years of research. So maybe I'll come back if you'll have me.
Yeah, let me know when you're ready. This was great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, DelSheree.